Welcome back to Big Mouth and fancy seeing you here. So why is Superman so hard to leave behind? Well, Superman the movie was the first film I ever saw. In fact, it's the very reason I became a Superman fan. Now, I'm not a big fan of the Hollywood Reporter. They always seem biased towards Disney. But I was on Facebook about an hour ago and I found a beautiful article about Superman the movie. I don't know who wrote it, but it's kind of interesting because he talks about this film in glowing terms, but says Superman the movie isn't actually his favourite Superman movie. He or she, I don't know, I don't know who wrote it actually, but he or she says that in fact Man of Steel and Batman v Superman are his favourite interpretations of live-action Superman. So I want to read this article to you. Let's move closer, let's get cosy, and let's go. 40 years ago, Richard Donner and Christopher Reeve made a superhero film that directors have been chasing for years, depicting who America was then, or at least who we wished to be. It's now easy to believe a man can fly. It wasn't in 1978, but today, in the midst of an explosion of superhero movies, it's a belief we give into with relative ease. Flight is the most often the bare minimum of what we expect from heroes and villains who can perform any feat limited only by the human imagination. It's not simply special effects that permit our belief, but rather an overall acceptance that these costume-clad characters are a defining part of our culture. Modern myths at their best and populist cinematic staples akin to the 20th century Western at their lowest form. There have been a record 9 theatrically released superhero movies based on comic books this year alone, each claiming a major piece of the global box office. That doesn't appear to be changing anytime soon. Maybe not ever. Superhero movies are here to stay, but there was a time when there was none, and then, in 1978, there was one. I actually love this article. 40 years ago, on December the 15th, 1978, Richard Donner not only made audiences believe a man could fly, but proved that superheroes could have just as much appeal for adults as they did for children. Superman pulled back the curtain, quite literally, at this film's start to reveal the story that proved to be just as monumental a cinematic culture shift as Jaws 1975 and Star Wars 1977. Superman was nominated for 3 Academy Awards and received a Special Achievement Oscar for visual effects. It was included into the Library of Congress National Film Registry in 2017. Amazing. Yet these accolades barely scratch the surface when it comes to trying to see the whole scope of Superman's impact. Even if we disagree over whether or not Superman the movie is the best superhero movie ever made, or even the best Superman movie, it's undeniable that Donner created a special film that, for both good and ill, has remained the most recognisable template for a superhero movie. And Superman today. From Christopher Nolan to Patty Jenkins, Superman has been cited as the gold standard. He or she says Superman is the Superman the movie, but you know what I'm talking about. But getting from Superman to The Dark Knight 2008 and Wonder Woman 2017 is no small leap. What is it about Superman that has resonated with filmmakers, critics and audiences across all these years? No other iteration of Superman, not those with Christopher Reeve reprising his role, not Bryan Singer's stiff footstep following the sequel reboot, not Zack Snyder's ambitious contemporary consideration of an alien godhood, have managed to have the same hold, the same collective adoration as the film that first allowed us to see Superman on the big screen. I'll be honest up front and say that Donner's Superman is not my favourite take on the character. I much prefer Zack Snyder's examination of the character in Man of Steel 2013 and Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice 2016. But there's no denying the greatness of Donner's film and its incredible legacy. So in recognising the fact that it might not be my favourite interpretation, I feel compelled to ask why Donner's Superman is that favourite interpretation for so many. Perhaps it's because it was the first of its kind, or because the film says something deeper about our need for heroes, made me choke up a bit there, to be shown in a certain light. Right, let's read this properly. Superman opens in black and white with stage curtains which pull back to reveal the year 1938. A child narrating the events of Action Comics before the film leaps off to space and John Williams' iconic score plays over the opening credits. It's as if the film is saying, this is Superman you knew 40 years ago. Now let's introduce you to Superman of today. Immediately, this grand gesture is suggestive of The Wizard of Oz 1939, letting audiences in on the secret that they are in for an event. It seems safe to assume that as soon as audiences were taken to Krypton, they became aware that this was not like the Superman series of George Reeves' TV show of their youth. This was full-scale epic in the vein of Gone with the Wind 1939, Ben-Hur 1959, and Spartacus 1960. Superman may have been recognisable to audiences as a DC comic book character created by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, but the movie treats him like both a character out of sweeping romance and a biblical figure. This isn't exactly a surprise given that the Godfather's Mario Puzo conceived the story, as much as Puzo and Francis Ford Coppola mythologized La Cosa's Nostra to tell an expansive story of the fathers and sons in Godfather 1972 and Godfather Part 2 1974. Puzo and Donner make a similar consideration of comic book characters here. Now, actually, even though Puzo originally penned the script, it was actually rewritten by Tom Mankiewicz. In fact, it was first written by Puzo, and then rewritten again, and then Richard Donner brought in Tom Mankiewicz, who did a great job rewriting the whole movie, just in case you didn't know that. While there's a lot to be said about the likeness of Superman as a whole, the film is really comprised of three distinct parts that are tonally unique. Krypton, Smallville, Metropolis, each one holding the key to unlocking the fortress of camaraderie that is Superman. Once the triumphant opening score dies down and we're taken to Krypton, the film becomes immediately brooding and foreboding. Krypton is inherently alien. It's everything we wouldn't expect from the birthplace of the world's biggest Boy Scout. Krypton is majestic, but it's also off emotionally detached. It's not simply Marlon Brando's stiff line reading as Jor-El that highlights this point, but the fact that Superman begins with the ending of a trial in which we watch the passionate faces of criminals Zod, Non and Ursa sentenced to an eternal living death, the Phantom Zone, by passionless jury. God, this is a good article, and a long one. I hope you're keeping with me. The white crystalline structure of Krypton dwellings and the technology further suggest that this lack of passion, this artful production design by the legendary John Barry, Star Wars, A Clockwork Orange, suggests a homogeny and an artless culture whose speech patterns, personalities, and white clothing are almost instinct. Oh God, I can't even read it. From their surroundings. We've seen this crystalline approach to Superman's home world in almost every adaptation since, from comic books, Smallville 2001 to 2011, Superman Returns 2006, and even as recently as last week's episode of Supergirl, they've all adhered closely to Barry's design, but they've never quite had the same effect because Superman uses it not simply for design, but for narrative, thematic purposes. All of these aspects of Krypton in the opening scenes create a heavenly sense, not heaven as any biblical story has led us to imagine, but a heaven we're cut off from, that we find strange and nearly hellish in the glow of the dying red sun. Much controversy has been made over recent years about Superman as a Christ figure, something that has become centrally referenced in both modern comics and Snyder's films. The point of contention has been that creators Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster were Jewish, and if Superman is any religious allegory, then surely he is Moses. But no, he's not, by the way. But Puzo and Donna make no effort to hide the fact that Superman in this iteration is an approximation of Jesus. Jor-El throws his line, the son becomes the father, and the father becomes the son. A great line by Tom Mankiewicz, by the way. Clearly establishes himself in his son as, for all intents and purposes, God. Jor-El's failure to save Krypton and death represent the destruction of the Old Testament and the birth of the New. It's important to recognise that Kal-El isn't simply sent to Earth because of its proximity to Krypton, but because Jor-El knows he'll be powerful there. Kal-El is trained to rise on Earth, and his father's recording messages in his spacecraft prepare him for his ground godhood and his potential to make Earth a heaven. Superman was released only 12 years after the famous 1966 Time article that asked, "Is God dead?" Superman, as part of the 70s and all its New Age belief systems and social changes, declared that he was not dead. God was very much alive in the realm of popular culture. Smallville sets another important stage for Superman's becoming. If Krypton cements his godhood, then Smallville cements his manhood. Though brief, our time in Smallville contains some of the film's finest moments. There's an earnest in which Jeff East portrays the teenage Clark Kent. Yeah, Jeff was great. As he cycles through his feelings for being an outsider, the joy of racing against a speeding train, and the grief he experiences at the death of his father, Jonathan Glenn Ford. All in a matter of minutes, Donner captures America's perfectly blending stylistic elements of Norman Rockwell's Sunday Post illustrations, Terrence Malick's Badlands, 1973, and John Ford's The Searchers, 1956. It's the America we wished existed at the time, a comic book framed of wide open spaces and the promise of manifest destiny. The finest moment in Donner's movie is that in which young Clark hugs his mother, Martha, Phyllis Thaxter, goodbye, pulls away, then hugs her again before leaving home. It's a moment of human warmth that works in complete opposition to almost everything we saw on Krypton. It's a moment that stirs us in the emotional honesty, and when critics talk about the need for moments of truth, a reality amidst all the special effects of modern superhero movies, it is surely this moment they have in mind. If there's any fault in the first act, it's that this transition from Clark to Superman takes place in an exposition dump from Jor-El, in which he lets Clark in on the history of the universe over a 12-year period. It's this leap from boy to man that inspired 10 seasons of Smallville, in which that oversight was reflected by Clark learning for experiences. It's interesting because most of our contemporary superhero films series play the long game, not letting our heroes truly become the heroes we recognise them as. Until the end, Batman hadn't amazed all his traits and relationships until the end of Batman Begins. 2006, Tony Stark wasn't fully functional superhero until the end of Iron Man 2008. It took 4 seasons for Oliver Queen to take up the name Green Arrow, and even Zack Snyder's Superman was in for a now scrapped 5-film arc that would have fully transformed him into the leader he's been depicted in the comics for so long. But Superman gives us that transformation almost immediately. So for most of the films, Superman is the Superman we recognise. He may learn some lessons in humility and defy his father along the way, but he's unbreakable in his convictions. A man of steel. This point in The Fortress of Solitude is where the film divides, and what comes after begins to feel like more of its own thing in terms of tone, theme, but perhaps that immediacy of Superman was something we needed. Maybe we still need. In order to give us a constant figure we could look at to as a hero. But Donner's Superman isn't just a hero, he's a father figure who knows the right answer and the right thing to do at every turn. Now we get to the Christopher Reeve of it all. Beyond anything, Reeve is the central reason why Superman has resonated for such a long time. This is really emotional to me. Hard for me to talk about, Chris. Reeve is not only transcendent as, I'm sorry about this, as Superman, but also as Clark Kent. More important than making audiences believe a man could fly is how Reeve manages to make us believe that Clark and Superman actually are two different people and could be seen by the rest of the world as such too. His depiction of Clark isn't just glasses and speaking in a high register. He's his own distinct character, complete with all these little tics, speech patterns, and a change in posture of that to this day remains not only one of the most impressive feats in portraying a comic book character, but in portraying any character, even though the film denies us a good 12 years of characters of the character's journey. When Reeve emerges as Clark Kent / Superman, we immediately gravitate towards him. We trust him completely, and because of his Superman's greatest narrative strength, it is romance. For an adaptation of a character born in Action Comics, Superman isn't particularly action-packed. Superman the movie isn't particularly an action-packed film. He saves people, stops robberies and natural disasters, but he doesn't fight. That will come later in Superman 2, 1980. Modern superhero films too often contain a multitude of battles that critics claim are repetitive or third act showdowns. Now, I want to stop there because I'm a bit sick and tired of critics criticising third act battles. What else do you expect them to do? But in fact, Aquaman didn't do that so much. Right, act showdown, mislabelled. As weak links. Oh, look. Here we go. AKA Wonder Woman. No, Wonder Woman's third act was awesome. So what if she had a third act showdown? Your reasonings, this is why I don't like critics. Anyway, it seems often that critics with Superman on their minds wish superhero movies hinge on something other than action and a showdown against a big bad. But why? It's awesome. And Superman, this was achieved through this hero's romance with the feisty Lois Lane, which is Margot Kidder, of course. Brilliant, the best Lois Lane. Just as Reeve would influence every depiction of Superman's going forward, such was Kidder's influence on Lois, absolutely. While she never escaped her comic book counterpart's early position as a damsel in distress, she proved to be capable, strong-willed and romantic, absolutely. But not of the foolish sort of the comics of the previous decades that had often depicted her as. Kidder's Lois Lane feels like a real human being, right down to her spelling mistakes. It was easy to see why Superman the movie, so interested in feeling human, would be drawn to Lois' endearingly flawed humanity. We learn to love Superman, to be as a father figure, best friend or romantic fantasy through Lois. It's not the helicopter save scene, notable as it is, that truly showcases the best of Lois and Superman. It's the rooftop scene. Absolutely, I agree. Which perfectly balances humour, sexual tension and genuine intrigue. Sam Raimi would later pay homage to these elements across his Spider-Man films, making these just as much about developing love story between Peter Parker and Mary Jane Watson as it was about action-packed power and responsibility. Donner achieves this romance simply and elegantly, so much so that we rarely give credibility to the complaint that Lois and Superman fell in love with each other over the course of a night. But isn't that a beautiful thing? If Clark's goodbye to his mother in this film is the film's best moment, then this is surely the film's best scene, and arguably for the same reason. It feels genuine when Superman tells Lois Lane that he never lies. We believe him. We believe everything about their exchange. It's the film's romance, something Patty Jenkins was so clearly inspired by while crafting Wonder Woman. That allows the latter moments of superheroics to work. There's a beating heart behind all those special effects, enabled flights, and feats of strength. For as much as filmmakers discuss the grounding of modern superhero films, it's rarely discussed correctly. It's not as much abiding to the rules of science and the interest of audience, or even the plausibility of the narrative. It's the emotional grounding that keeps our minds steady, even as our hearts soar with flights of fantasy. Once we're situated in Metropolis, Superman the movie is a balancing act between real-world emotions and cartoony plot mechanics. Lex Luthor, Gene Hackman, along with his sidekicks, Otis, Ned Beatty, and Eve Tessmacher, Valerian Perrine, are easily the least grounded aspects of the film. All three actors give delightful performances, with Hackman relishing in being the smartest person in the room, but it's clear that Donner was less interested in the villain than the hero. Tim Burton would later turn this concept on its head when his Batman 1989 and Batman Returns 1992 obviously showed more interest in the dark channels of villainy than heroism. Both concepts are great to me, I don't mind. Raimi and Nolan found a balance between exploring heroes and villains, while the majority of the films in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, particularly early on, borrow from Donner's method of focusing. We know Kevin Feige is inspired by Donner's Superman, don't we? On the hero more than the villain, with decidedly mixed results. But for 1978, audiences were fine with letting the villain take the back seat and happy to let them behave badly without the need to explore the psychological complexities. Superman was more than enough to take the spotlight, whereas today we anticipate the Joker, Luthor, Green Goblin and Thanos to steal the show and prove the adage that a hero is only as good as his villain. Superman the movie proved that a hero is only as good as his love story. The moment when Superman fails to stop Lois' death in an earthquake is shocking upon the first watch. It is. It goes against everything we would expect from the first superhero movie and everything later films would teach us about superhero movies. Superman's bellow of rage and hurt catches us off guard because of even after seeing him exposed to kryptonite, we've never seen Superman weakened like this. We've never seen him lose. Now, the way Superman gets out of this situation and saves lives by flying so fast against the Earth's rotation that he turns back time is a questionable narrative, absolutely. I think it's stupid, but we forgive them, don't we? That eliminates the possibility for Superman ever facing real loss, and it doesn't begin to touch on the fact that he could do this for countless others but chooses not to, because their love stories are less important. But because it's a heroic feat of love, we go along with it, I agree. We not only accept the idea that Superman loved this woman so much he would turn back time, we embrace it. The Deus Ex Machina doesn't get the same pass when it's used again in the Donner cut of Superman 2, but it's at least better than the memory-wiping kiss in the theatrical cut of Superman 2. Nevertheless, Superman gets away with this reversal of time because it has built itself up as a love story, and we want to see that promise fulfilled. If Superman had turned back time simply to stop Luthor, it's doubtful the film would have left audiences as satisfied. Superman and Luthor's relationship may have formed the central thrust of most of the comics, television shows and movies that came later, but here it couldn't be less important. Luthor is a third wheel in this Superman story, a distraction from a love of a god, a love of home and a love of a partner, all aspects that measured out to a certain hearty American rightness found in Donner's Superman. There's an optimism in Superman the movie that even our most light-hearted superhero movies of today pale in comparison to. Whilst filmmakers have become fascinated with the question of what happens when a superhero loses, Superman was primarily concerned with him winning. Superman's godlike confidence and belief in truth, justice and the American way seem like a far cry from where a global superhero cinema is today. Superman lives in a world of smiling politicians, truth of press and open-minded citizens who are overjoyed at the arrival of an alien. Even as an international production, it's distinctly American. It's a distinctly American feature. Donner's film presents the best version of us in the midst of our question about the existence of God, our celebration of civil rights movement, and the trauma left over from the Vietnam War. Donner's Superman was the film we felt like we deserved and needed. I'm not sure we do anymore. We love Superman, the movie, because it's part of our cultural identity and a reminder of how we once felt when we saw Christopher Reeve fly over the world and smile at the camera, the films, ends to suggest he's protecting us too. But identities change, as do worlds. Just as Donner's Superman re-envisioned the character after 40 years of the superhero's existence, it's time we accept that it's been 40 years since Donner's film, and we are in need of another change. Superman the movie will always influence superhero movies, but it's time to leave behind the John Williams score. Oh, I don't know about that. The crystalline structure of Krypton and the imitations of Christopher Reeve. For good. We've tried to replicate it across every medium, but it never works in quite the same way because Superman is so neatly tied to our past and who America was then, or at least who we wish to be. It's our commendation of ourselves, a lust story for us just as much as it is for Lois and Clark. But in 40 years we've discovered new wishes, found new loves, who ask us to aspire to something greater, as people and moviegoers, just as Donner's film once did. Superman was the light that showed us the way, and now we see a path in front of us. It's time to chart a new course and discover where the next 40 years of Superman stories could take us, and what superhero stories will form our next cinematic cultural shift. Wow, that was a long article, wasn't it? I didn't expect that. What do you think about that article? I loved reading it. I actually got tired reading it because I suffer with my kidneys and my throat gets bunged up and stuff. But I really enjoyed reading that. I'm sorry I broke down a couple of times, but this is the first film I ever saw. Christopher Reeve means so much to me. Superman means so much to me. And this is why you're seeing me come on here sometimes ranting when people slate Superman, because such a wonderful character. There's always been the question, is Superman your uncle's or your granddad's superhero? A debate for another time. But as we talk about the 40th anniversary of this film is an absolute timeless classic. And it's one I'll never forget. Thank you for watching.